Improving my English pronunciation was something I kept private for a long time. It wasn't that I was ashamed of my accent or the way I spoke, but there was a deep, personal motivation behind it. I wanted to be able to speak with clarity and confidence, especially during my travels and interactions with English-speaking friends. But the methods I used were unconventional, even strange at times, which is why I kept them a secret. They worked for me, though, and over time, they transformed the way I spoke. It all started after a trip to London, a place where I had always dreamed of visiting. During my stay, I couldn't help but notice how effortlessly the locals pronounced words. Their accents were crisp, and their words flowed in a way that mine didn't. I realized that while I could hold conversations in English, my pronunciation lacked the smoothness that I admired. This was the moment I decided to dedicate time to mastering English pronunciation, though I knew I'd need to approach it in my own unique way. One of my earliest secret techniques involved music. I have always been a music lover, and I decided to use this passion to improve my pronunciation. I started by listening to English songs and mimicking the way the singers pronounced the words. But I didn't stop there. I would slow down the songs, sometimes to half speed, and carefully enunciate each syllable. Singing along became my daily routine, and because I was doing it with songs I loved, it didn't feel like practice. It felt like fun. Gradually, I noticed that my pronunciation was improving. Singing forced me to stretch out words and focus on their sounds in a way regular speaking didn't. Songs with challenging lyrics, like those from artists like Adele or Ed Sheeran, became my personal tests. I would sing lines like, "Set fire to the rain," over and over, making sure my tongue moved the right way, my lips formed the sounds correctly, and my voice carried the right intonation. It was a secret method that not only improved my pronunciation, but also gave me a sense of rhythm in my speech. Another technique I kept hidden was shadowing podcasts. Shadowing is when you listen to a native speaker and repeat exactly what they say, trying to mimic their pronunciation, rhythm, and intonation. I downloaded podcasts on various topics, anything from travel stories to scientific discussions. I would listen to them alone, repeating every word just a second behind the speaker. Sometimes, I would even pause the audio and practice a single sentence until I could say it with the same speed and clarity as the host. It wasn't easy at first. There were words that felt unnatural for my tongue, sounds that I simply couldn't replicate. But through repetition and patience, I slowly got better. I even began recording myself shadowing these podcasts. Listening back to the recordings was both humbling and encouraging. I could hear my mistakes, but I could also hear my progress. Over time, this method became a cornerstone of my secret pronunciation practice. To further fine-tune my speech, I turned to something less conventional, tongue twisters. I would practice these tricky phrases in front of a mirror every day. The goal was not just to say them fast, but to say them clearly and correctly. Tongue twisters like, "She sells seashells by the seashore," or "Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers" were particularly useful. They forced me to move my mouth in new ways and stretch my vocal muscles, which improved my articulation over time. There was one particularly secretive method that felt a bit odd, but it worked wonders. I would place a pencil horizontally in my mouth, right between my teeth, and try to speak clearly. This exercise made my mouth work harder, forcing me to over-enunciate every word. At first, my speech sounded garbled, but after weeks of practicing this technique, I noticed that when I spoke without the pencil, my words were much clearer. It was like weightlifting for my mouth, and it helped me develop stronger pronunciation muscles. In addition to these techniques, I found that recording myself while speaking was incredibly useful. I'd sit in my room and pretend to give a presentation or narrate a story, and I'd record the whole thing on my phone. Then, I'd play it back and listen closely. What surprised me was how differently I sounded when I wasn't paying attention to pronunciation versus when I was consciously focusing on it. Hearing my own voice helped me catch mistakes that I wouldn't have noticed otherwise. One secret method that really accelerated my progress was the use of speech recognition software. I would practice speaking into my phone or computer, dictating sentences to see how accurately the software understood me. If it misunderstood certain words, I would repeat those words until the software could recognize them correctly. It was like having a personal pronunciation coach, silently correcting me. This method was both fun and challenging, as it forced me to aim for clarity in every word. Another technique I practiced involved watching English news channels with the subtitles turned on. I would mute the volume and try to read the subtitles aloud, imitating how I imagined the newscasters would say the words. Then, I'd unmute the sound and listen to how the anchors actually pronounce those words, comparing my version with theirs. This helped me adjust my pronunciation in real time and learn the formal speaking style of news reporters. Travel also provided me with opportunities to improve my pronunciation in secret. On trips to places like Singapore, Hong Kong, and Istanbul, where English is spoken with different accents, I would pay close attention to how people spoke. I made mental notes of their pronunciation and tried to mimic their way of speaking. I also made a habit of engaging in conversations with locals, but with a secret mission, to use new words and see if they could understand me clearly. Their reactions were like mini feedback sessions, letting me know if my pronunciation was effective. There was another tool I used. Though it may sound strange, I would talk to myself. Not just quietly under my breath, but full-on conversations as if I were rehearsing for a role in a play. I found that speaking to myself allowed me to practice without feeling self-conscious. It gave me the freedom to make mistakes, repeat words, and try different intonations until I got them right. I'd do this in private, of course, making sure no one could hear me, but it worked wonders for my confidence and pronunciation. A more social method I secretly employed was joining online English speaking groups and video calls. These were communities where people practiced English, and they didn't know I was there primarily to work on my pronunciation. I would listen carefully to how others spoke, especially native speakers, and practice imitating their sounds. During the calls, I made a point to speak slowly and clearly, paying attention to how I formed each word. Over time, this practice sharpened my pronunciation in real-life situations. One of my more creative techniques involved lip-syncing English movies. I'd watch my favorite films, ones with clear, articulate dialogue, and silently move my mouth along with the actors. It was a playful way to practice mouth movements and match the rhythm of natural English speech. By mimicking actors, I learned how to naturally form sounds and adjust my pronunciation to fit more fluid, conversational English. I also found that breathing exercises were an unexpected but important part of improving my pronunciation. I discovered that proper breath control helped me speak more clearly and project my voice better. I began practicing diaphragmatic breathing, the kind singers use to sustain their voices. This not only helped me avoid running out of breath mid-sentence, but also improved the clarity of my speech, as I had better control over the pace and flow of my words. To push my pronunciation even further, I began focusing on specific sounds that I found difficult, like the th sound in words like think or the r sound in words like rare. I practiced these sounds repeatedly, often exaggerating them to get the movements right. It felt silly at times, but I could hear the improvement in my speech as I worked through these challenging sounds. One of my more secretive methods involved learning phonetics. I studied the International Phonetic Alphabet, IPA, which is a system that represents sounds in a language. Learning IPA helped me understand the exact sounds that make up English words. It was a more technical approach, but knowing how sounds are created made it easier for me to reproduce them accurately. On top of that, I incorporated mouth exercises into my routine. Similar to how athletes stretch before a workout, I would warm up my mouth before practicing pronunciation. This involved stretching my lips, moving my tongue in different directions, and even humming to relax my vocal cords. These small exercises made my mouth more flexible and prepared me for speaking more clearly. Despite all the techniques I used, I never wanted anyone to know how hard I was working on my pronunciation. It felt like a personal challenge, something I had to conquer on my own. Every time someone complimented my speaking skills or noted how clear my pronunciation was, I felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. Little did they know, behind the scenes, I was employing these secret strategies day in and day out. As I continued to improve, I began noticing that speaking English became more natural. Words that used to trip me up now rolled off my tongue with ease. I no longer hesitated before saying difficult words or avoided conversations because of my accent. My confidence grew, and I found myself enjoying conversations in English more than ever before. I realized that improving pronunciation wasn't about losing my accent entirely. Instead, it was about making sure I was understood clearly, no matter who I was speaking to. With this mindset, I continued practicing my secret methods, knowing that they had already taken me so far. My pronunciation journey was deeply personal, filled with unconventional techniques that worked for me. And though I kept them private, the results spoke for themselves every time I opened my mouth to speak English.